before the second act. The protagonist follows through vaguely lit corridors, up and down stone staircases, past the dressing room of a soprano singing the part of a shackled slave. Maddox is described as tall, with a dusting of grey hair, dressed in a coat of antique cut, oddly blank in effect. There were no tongues of fire circling him, no stink of sulphur. Everything about him seemed quite ordinary and normal, the novelist writes. But this diabolical ordinariness was saturated with meaning and power. Maddox comes and goes in the story, which ends in the slush outside of the theatre, the protagonist encased in the Moscow night and an atmosphere of neurosis. The real Michael Maddox was born in England on May 14th, 1747, though he claimed to have ancient Russian roots. His Protestant ancestors had immigrated to Russia in the 17th century, the era of the Catholic Stuart monarchy, to escape religious persecution. He was the sole surviving son of the English actor Tom Maddox, who with all his family and troop perished in a cargo boat crash near the port of Holyhead, all except one infant who floated ashore in a cradle. The orphan was raised by his uncle Seward, a trumpeter. Following in his father's footsteps, Maddox became an entertainer, performing tightrope acts in the 1750s at Haymarket Theatre and Covent Garden in London. He balanced a mere 3 feet above the stage, less to reduce the danger to himself than to his audience. Toward the end of his act, he would hover on 1 foot while balancing a straw on the edge of a glass and plinking a fiddle. Other anecdotes from London have him blowing a horn and banging a drum on the slack wire. He also tumbled and conducted unspecified physical and mechanical experiments. Outside of London, he acted in saltbox theatres and manipulated fairground puppets, with Punch as his favourite. In York, during race week, he and his troupe performed morning and evening at Merchants' Adventurers Hall, among other venues. In the southwest English town of Bath, he entertained ladies and gentlemen, along with the servants who held their places while their masters mingled at Simpson's rooms. For a considerable salary, Maddox pivoted and swung above the audience while balancing a coach wheel and juggling a dozen balls. Lore has it that Maddox was engaged in mysterious business dealings throughout Europe, which perhaps explains his connection to the English and Russian diplomats, George Macartney and Nikita Panin, who brokered his first visit to Russia in January 1767. Notice of his tightrope act appeared in St. Petersburg in October of that year. The language in the newspaper bulletin suggested a certain age of curiosity's excitement about Maddox's debut in the imperial capital. Herewith it is declared that the celebrated English equilibrist Michael Maddox will be demonstrating his art in the Woodwinter Home, to which all inclined respectable individuals are invited. Maddox went to Russia without means, and without knowing the language, but managed, after falsely claiming an Oxford education and some teaching experience, to find work amusing Pavel I, son of the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Pavel was delighted by his new tutor's cours de récréation mathématique et physique. Maddox must have exceeded expectations, and Catherine declared her gratitude to him in the form of an official letter of commendation. That kept him away from the rabble of the fairground. He returned to London to direct a theatre, but in the 1770s St. Petersburg lured him back. Maddox shelved the magic shows for clockmaking and the invention of fanciful automatons, including music box dancers. In tribute to his benefactress, Catherine the Great, he designed an elaborate clock whose bronze and crystal figurines allegorized her achievements. The figure of Hercules, who represented Russia's suppression of Sweden, stood in the middle of 3 columns atop a music box. The base was formed by statues of maidens gesturing toward the 4 corners of the earth. Every 5 minutes, the preferred length of meetings at Catherine's court, chimes rang and miniature eagles dropped jewels from the top of the columns into the open beaks of eaglets in their nests. The gilded vignette was meant to illustrate how the Russian Empire nurtured its conquered territories. Engravings on the pedestal and atop the music box showed stars, planets, and the rays of the sun. Catherine the Great herself never saw or heard the clock, however, having died of a stroke in 1796, a decade before Maddox completed it. It was privately sold, then put on public display, and during the Revolution confiscated by the state. Eventually, in 1929, it ended up in the Kremlin armory. The peregrinations of showmen led to appearances in other Russian cities, including the comparative backwater of Moscow, where the non-governmental university newspaper Moskovskiye Vedomosti, Moscow Gazette,